Fantastic. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today's guest to the expert interview series, Kevin Thompson. After selling 6.16 million of his own products and services solely through strategic partnerships, Kevin Thompson intimately understands the value of right relationships. Through his role as the host of the Million Dollar Relationships podcast and being the conduit of trust for entrepreneurs he serves, Kevin facilitates relationship that impacts millions of people's lives, which organically leads to millions of dollars of revenue being created. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, Ross, I am honored to be here. Looking forward to having a conversation with you today.
Absolutely. And of course, we just spoke a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
But for anyone who hasn't come across you yet, tell us, how did it all start?
Oh my gosh. So uh, it started. So I used my very first business. I had a cleaning and restoration company. We did carpet cleaning. We did water damage restoration work. And back in 2000, I was at this seminar where these guys were doing some cool stuff on the internet. And I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if I could incorporate that and start doing stuff online instead of just having a local reach? What if I could have a nationwide or even a worldwide reach? And so we ended up starting this website, probably one of the ugliest websites on the internet, Ross.
Mhm.
It was called getmoldsolutions.com. There's remnants of that website still there. Next time that domain expires, I'll just let it expire. But for right now, it's still there at the moment. And but in a matter of a couple of years, by 2003, that website was producing 15, 16,000 a month for the business and stuff. And Joe Polish, who he was the guy that like really helped me grow my cleaning and restoration business. He did this annual event every year for the cleaning and restoration industry. And in the spring of '03, him and I were talking. He's like, Kev, he's like, why don't you come down here to the annual event in November and show everybody what you're doing with your website? And I'm like, sure, I'd be happy to do that. And he's like, and before you come, he's like, make sure you document what you do and how you do it and put it into a course because a certain percentage of the folks, once they hear from you, they're going to want your help and just make sure you're ready to give them that. And so I did. And long story short, I spoke at that event. I was definitely nervous because I'd never spoken in public like that before. Fortunately, it was kind of a friendly house. There was a lot of people who knew me because I was just in that industry and stuff. But at the end of my presentation, I just simply said, "Hey, if this resonates with you, if you feel like I might be able to help you, I'd be totally honored to do that. Here's what that looks like, and here's what the investment is." And we ended up making $35,000 in sales of that course that I had just created. And I was just like, wow. And I couldn't articulate it at the time, Ross. But what Joe and I had just done was we just did a strategic partnership, you know.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is our focus was not on, oh, if we do this, we're going to make a ton of money. Our focus was on, he was like, Kev, he's like, you have something of value to offer that he felt his people would be interested in, would benefit from. And essentially, he felt that putting me in front of them would help him further the relationship he already had with those folks. And I can tell you, if he would have thought for 1 second that I would have anyway damaged the relationship that he had with all of his folks, he would have never done that. He would have never given me the opportunity to speak there, regardless of how much money could have been made. And so I really learned that, you know, the value of right relationships. And over the course of the next 12 years, I ended up selling the cleaning and restoration company the following year, April 19th of '04. We moved into this new business that I had just started, thanks to Joe. We started a publishing company. And over the course of the next 12 years, we sold $16.1 million worth of that training that I had created, and did that primarily through strategic partnerships, partnering with other entrepreneurs who helped me get my message out into the marketplace. And I, in turn, just because I appreciated them for the role that they held in my life. I was just naturally wanting to do whatever I could do to help them as well. Through that process, I discovered that one of my gifts, in fact, my main gift is being a connector for entrepreneurs like that, being a connector for entrepreneurs who are making a real impact in the world already, and who are just doing great things. So over the years, I've kind of just moved more and more into that role, and that's kind of how we got going down this path to start with. So
Love it. Absolutely brilliant. I'm a big believer in strategic partnerships as well. We grew our first business up to 35 members of staff, not all full time, without any marketing, just strategic partnerships.
yeah, yeah.
Works so well. But we were talking off air before, weren't we? And I know your understanding and appreciation of the importance of relationships goes back even further. You told us a great story about when you were in the military.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I joined the military right out of high school. I graduated high school in 1983 and went to basic training in the fall of that year. And then in the beginning of '84, I went to signal school to become a station tech controller. Basically, I set up telephone systems for the military and for all four military branches. And so during the course of my time in the military, I got to spend time in lots of places throughout the country. But one of the places that I got to spend time with was in Honduras in Central America. And my very first night in country at work, I ended up getting a call at work from a gentleman who was just asking for a phone line, asking if I could give him a phone line so that he could call back home to the States and talk with his wife. And I was like, sure. I mean, I didn't really give much thought to it. I was like, sure, you can have a phone line. And I gave him a phone line. And the next night, I'm at work, and the area that we worked in was like a secure area where you had to come in through a certain entry point where the military police were at, and you had to show your ID and all of that in order to get in, and just so I could go to work. And the second night, I get a call from the military police guy out at the guard shack, and he's telling me, he's like, Kev, he's like, you've got some full bird colonel out here wanting to talk with you, and I'm like, what the heck? I mean, and Ross, my first thought was like, my gosh, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in trouble. And so I go heading out to the guard shack, and it's pouring down rain that night. And when I get out there, yep, there is a full bird colonel in uniform out there, and he introduces himself to me, and he's like, Kevin, he's like, I'm the guy that you gave a phone line to last night. And I know that you don't have to do that. You are not required to do that at all, but you did. And I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to bring you some food. He brought me a big old plate of spaghetti and meatballs, and a plate of garlic, or of Caesar salad and garlic bread. And he's like, I just wanted to, show my appreciation for you giving me a phone line to call back home and talk with my wife. And he's like, I run the air unit on the other side of the base over here. And anytime you want to come over, he's like, drinks are on me. And I'll tell you, Ross, well, for one, the military in the States, that's not how it works. You don't have a full bird colonel communicating with. I was just an E4 enlisted, a specialist at the time. You just don't communicate that way in the States. But when you're in Central America at that time, when you're in kind of a war zone, life is different. And I just really learned. I mean, and I did. I took him up on that offer, and through my time in Honduras, I went over there a fair amount. In fact, I even got to go flying around the country with those guys and go on my time off and go and visit some really cool places and stuff. And I really learned the value of just treating people well, because you never know who you're really talking with or who they know. But that experience, I couldn't even articulate it back then at that time, because I was just a kid out of high school in the military. But that experience, I have always remembered that. And I look at who I am in communication with, and who the kind of people and the kind of entrepreneurs that I get to serve today. I mean, entrepreneurs who are making such a massive impact in the world, and yet I get to be their conduit of trust. I get to be that person and just kind of hold that role for them just because of how I show up and stuff. And it's just an incredibly rewarding place to be in because the people I serve today and the connections I get to facilitate, it impacts millions of people's lives, which then organically leads to millions of dollars in revenue being created. And I love being able to have a hand in that. So
Brilliant. Do you, so you've clearly you've always been good with people, a good communicator. Do you think that is innate? Do you think that's natural, or do you think it can be taught?
part of it definitely comes natural to me. And it's what, Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach calls it unique ability. And every one of us has unique ability. It's this thing or things that we can do that we are just really brilliant at, that yet we might even blow off because it comes so easily to us that we just think mistakenly that, oh, anybody could do that. And yet that's not true at all. And so I do, there is a couple things. I absolutely love talking with entrepreneurs. I love hearing what they're up to. I love hearing what they're working on that inspires them most. I love hearing about the challenges they're having because I just naturally default to who do I know who might be able to help them with this. I love hearing about the opportunities they're trying to take advantage of for the same exact reason. I just naturally default to who do I know that might be able to help them with this. And so that is definitely, those pieces of it are definitely my unique ability, and I just love doing that. And my brain just works that way. I've told a lot of people about this over the years, and they're like, Kev, it makes my head hurt to think of trying to do what you do, and how you can just be in a conversation, just remember, and like, oh, you need to talk with so and so, and I might not even have maybe had a conversation with that person in a year, 2 years, 5 years, what have you. But I can totally reach out to them and say, hey, I want to connect you with so and so. Here's why. And if you feel that would be valuable, I'd love to do that. And just facilitate those kind of connections and stuff. And so part of it is innate. A lot of it is also just personal growth. I have definitely had to grow immensely as a person in order to just even be able to do what I'm able to do these days. Because, well, I'll give you an example. A lot of times with entrepreneurs who I felt in my mind had done things or had accomplishments so much bigger than my own. Maybe they're a millionaire or a billionaire or what have you. I would maybe put them on a pedestal and think, oh, like, well, they're way up here and here's me down here somewhere. And so for quite a long time, that was an impediment. That definitely stopped me from making the real kind of impact that I could make, because now I've found out that, like, serving entrepreneurs like that, that's how I can have my biggest impact, is by serving entrepreneurs like that. And so I have had to grow and have experience, and just having conversations with them over the years, Ross, it's allowed me to have this experience, and it's allowed me to make these discoveries and find out. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. I have a friend of mine. I've known him for 13 years. He is a billionaire. If this guy never made another penny in his day, at all, it wouldn't matter to him. And he does not do what he does now because he's motivated by money. He's inspired to use his gifts and his resources to make his biggest impact in the world. And what I can also tell you about this gentleman is, because of many of the past experiences that he's had, he's kind of a private person. He's untrusting of people in some ways, because when people become that successful, a lot of other people want things from them. And that has been his experience, that a lot of people reach out and they're like, what can you do to help me and stuff. And so, for him and I becoming friends over a 13-year period, I've never I've just been I just appreciate him for who he is, and for being the husband that he is, being the father that he is, being the entrepreneur that he is. And I love, just, if there's anything I can do to help him, I'm all in doing that. And as a result of just showing up that way for him, I now hold. In fact, he told me recently, a couple months ago, that he's like, Kevin, he's like, you are one of only three people that hold the kind of space that you hold in my life, where anybody that you bring into my life or suggest that I should have a conversation with, they go right to the front of the line and get my immediate attention, simply because they came through you. And, I don't say that to brag or boast, because nothing could be further from the truth. What is really going on here, and this comes with a ton of responsibility too, is that I am his conduit of trust. And I take that position, I take that role very, very seriously. I would never bring anyone into his life if I thought for 1 second that it would damage the relationship that he and I already have. Everybody
Yeah.
that I bring into his life, I want it to further the relationship that we already have, regardless of what actually takes place from that or not. I want him coming back going, wow, Kev, that was awesome. That was such an amazing person. Thanks so much. That's what I want to hear from him, you know? And
Yeah.
so it's far more than just being a connector. It is, like I said, being this conduit of trust for these amazing entrepreneurs who are making such an impact, because when they get to their level that they're at, their circle of people that they can truly trust and confide in is very small. And I just want to be one of those people for them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I remember being in my 20s and there was a guy, we've been friends now for 25, 30 years, but he was the guy. He had a bigger house, he had sports cars, and we used to go to his house on a weekend and then there'd be a party there. And after a period of time, I said, look, Andrew, I was like, I'm super proud of everything you've done. Like, I'm just really pleased to know you, and you extend this warm welcome to us. And he said, wow, can I stop you there? He's like, no one's ever said that. People just
Yeah,
come every week, drink my alcohol, take advantage, ask me for things. You're the first person that's ever said that. And we've stayed like best friends. He was the best man at my wedding, actually.
that's
Like
awesome.
nearly 30 years later. And a couple of years ago, when he was looking to sell his business, again, we were chatting, and I helped him sell it for about 25% more than he thought he was going to. And it was lovely to be able to give that back, like such a long,
Yeah.
long period of time later. But you've got to be careful with your relationships, don't you? As you say.
Oh, absolutely. And I, when we come from the standpoint of, if I do this, will it further the relationship that I already have with this person? You know, and if the answer is yes, then it's a go. If the answer is no, then it is a no go. And it's really easy for me to just kind of check in with how that feels and stuff. And it's that feeling that just is kind of in the background of everything that I do. And I have zero problem whatsoever turning down opportunities that can produce revenue, can produce income. But if it's not in alignment, then I'm sorry, but it's got to be a no. And sometimes that happens. But I'll tell you, in the long run, I mean, I've been doing this for, gosh, I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for 28 years. I've been really kind of, focused on relationships for the last 20 years. And I've invested millions of dollars, and I don't know how much time, lots of time, putting myself in places where I would meet the right people to start with, and just forming these relationships over the years and stuff. And when we do just show up this way, and the people in our lives just know that that's who we are, and we just continue standing by that, and that's just who we are, and that's just how we show up. Well, now, I mean, man, I look at some of the things going on right now, the kind and caliber of people that I'm in contact with and communication with, the relationships that I'm facilitating, the deals that I'm helping put together, and I'm just like, wow, look at this, you know. And as exciting as it is right here and now, I also just get goosebumps thinking about what's going to be going on in 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, because my goal is I just want to continually just becoming as efficient as I possibly can and effective as I possibly can at doing what I do and serving the people that I serve. And so I just learn stuff all the time, and just, I wouldn't say get better, but become more effective, you know.
Yeah,
And
I really like that. And I guess part of that, you mentioned personal development. That was a big part of who you are. You mentioned Joe Polish. You mentioned Dan Sullivan. Do you think? Well, like one, I guess. Who are the three people, if that's not too mean a question, who have influenced you the most? And the second part of that is, do you think people should focus on themselves before they focus on their business?
so So Joe Polish and Dan Sullivan definitely have been huge influences in my life. Joe was the very first business connection I ever made when I was struggling with the cleaning and restoration business, and I found him through a trade publication for the industry, and he, over the course of a 3-year period, helped me completely transform that business into one of the most the well, top 3% of cleaning industries or cleaning companies in the industry, and that was all thanks to Joe. And and of course, in 2007, Joe started the Genius Network group, and I joined that group in '08, and just that was the first high level group that I ever joined. And I will tell you, writing Joe a $25,000 check, I had never written a $25,000 check before. And so that was an experience in and of itself, because you don't make monthly installments to Joe to be in Genius Network. You just write him a check for 25,000 for the year. And having never written a check like that before, I was like, just, I don't know that I was nervous, but it was definitely on my mind. And even going into that very first meeting, that first 2-day meeting I ever attended, at that meeting, I met this guy, Dan Cushell, and a group of us had gone out to dinner to this sushi restaurant that evening. And I ended up sitting next to Dan, and we got to talking. And I was telling him about how, yeah, Joe and I go back, and he's been so instrumental in helping me grow the cleaning and restoration business before I sold it. And he really kind of launched me in this new direction with this training that I created. He was kind of the inspiration for that, and it's kind of started me in this whole new business now. And I told him, I said, man, this is the first time I've ever invested this much in myself at once. And I'm not going to lie, this is just new to me. And I'm a little bit I just don't know what to expect. But I trust Joe. I trust Joe because, man, I've had such a good experience with him in the past. And I love Joe. And Dan's like, Kev, I love Joe too. I love Joe too. And so as I told him more, Dan's like, he's like, Kev, I think you and I could do some stuff together. And I think we could really impact some lives. And I think we can make some good income together. And he's like, why don't we see if we just can't get that money right back in your bank account as quick as possible, so that you can just enjoy your time and your experience being in the group for the year. And so we did. And within 45 days, the bulk of that money was right back in my bank account. And of course, Dan and I have become close friends. We're still close friends to this day. And so, so much has come through my relationship with Joe, with Dan Sullivan. I mean, and quite on, the other gentleman that I was talking about, my billionaire friend Isaac, he has been so instrumental because that relationship is 13 years, going on 13 years at this point, and he is somebody who saw in me things that I might not have saw in myself at the time, and really championed me for just doing what I do and supporting me in what I do, and making me realize that, man, Kev, he's like, you step it up and you just keep on leaning into this and just keep on being you, because you are such a unique individual. He's like, I never met anybody like you. And so to have those influences in our lives, and to be able to have them see things in us that we might not be able to see for ourselves, and just really champion us and just kind of rooting us on, and Isaac was also kind of like, Kev, you should really kind of look at this, because you could start getting equity, like getting people to compensate you. That's cool. That'll make you rich. But Kev, equity is what will make you wealthy. Equity is what will get you a position where you never will like have to worry about making money again. And that's what I've done in my own life. That's what I've been doing for years. And now I've got equity deals going. And I'm like, how cool is this? And like, I didn't know how to do equity deals, but he was rooting for me. He's like, Kevin, I'm going to show you how to structure this. And he ended up getting me into a position where the guy just offered me equity and stuff. And when I told him that this guy offered me equity, he's like, well, good deal, Kevin. That was the right thing for him to do. And so thanks to people like that, I've been introduced to things that I never knew about, that I never thought even possible, that have now become reality, because I have these people that I'm surrounded with that just recognize my gifts and recognize my abilities too and stuff. So
Amazing. Yeah. And do you think that having people around you like that is really important for all entrepreneurs? Or do you think you can, just
it's
go it alone?
critical. Yes, it is. I will tell you, I I have talked with lots of entrepreneurs over the years, and that serve clients that they would really rather not be serving, but they kind of took them on because they're like, man, we could really use the money. And they might even be serving. You might be listening to this right now. You might be in that position where, we've got a few clients that, man, they're kind of a pain, and they don't treat my team very well, or whatever that is, whatever that looks like. And sometimes I get it when we're not, when funds are tight, or when we're not we don't have our own financial needs just met, house over our head, and a roof over our head, and food on the table, and that kind of stuff. We're like, okay, we want to at least cover our own just basic needs here and stuff. But I'll tell you, when we can really come from the standpoint of, I'm going to make the decision that I am only going to serve people when I just like, I would love the idea of serving them because I love who they are. I love how they show up. And, there's not a person in my life that I serve. And it's not like I serve hundreds or thousands of people. I don't. I mean, I serve a very small number of people, and I'm very intentional about who I serve. And I wouldn't bring anybody into my world that I wouldn't invite into my home for dinner with my family. And in fact, many of the clients that I serve, they have been in my home, and they all have my cell phone number, because I want the lines of communication open. And the reality is, you know what? Nobody's ever abused that. I give them all my cell phone number, and like most of the time, they hardly even call or text. But if they do, I don't mind, because it's them. It's them,
Yeah.
and I look forward. There is my cell phone never rings other than when it says scam likely, and that guy he calls me and probably everybody else a lot, and I just ignore that. But every other time my phone rings, nobody ever calls me where I look at that and go, ugh, cringe. I never do that. I never do that because the only people who have my cell phone number are people that I want to have my cell phone number and that I want to hear from, and that like I want them to want to hear from me too. You know.
Brilliant, yeah. And I imagine a lot of people listening, yeah, do know exactly what you're like. Certainly I do. I remember our first business when we started, we kind of accepted everybody, and we ended up with some toxic clients in there. And one day I remember just saying, "You can't talk to my staff like that." I jumped on the phone and I was like, "We don't want to work with you anymore." And they were like, "What? You can't do that. You need us." I was like, "No, do you know what? We don't." And all the guys in the team were like, "Amazing, that's brilliant. Like, didn't think you'd do that." No, we don't need
Yeah.
that. And it was a
Yeah.
great feeling.
It's a great feeling, and it's also, when we have team, and they just know that we got their backs too. I'm gonna tell you what, they're gonna kick things up a notch for us because when they know how much we appreciate them by our actions, when we just demonstrate that by our actions, they because you know what we do is infinitely more powerful than anything we say. And when we demonstrate that we got their back like that, and that we're not going to allow clients to belittle them or devalue them or what have you, man, that speaks volumes. And they are they're just going to want to serve us that much more powerfully, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's switch it up now a little bit and tell us more about exactly what you do. So tell us about the podcast and tell us about the groups as well.
So the podcast. Wow, we launched the podcast 2.5 years ago. So the $1 Million Relationships podcast. We launched that podcast 2.5 years ago. At the time we launched it, hosting a podcast, Ross, it wasn't even on my radar. Not even in the vicinity. But my buddy, Brad Costanzo, I was meeting with him down in San Diego. We had got together for lunch, and Brad has hosted a podcast for years. It's called Bacon Wrapped Business. And you can tell from the podcast name that Brad is a pretty laid back, easygoing, fun guy. And he's also an absolutely brilliant world class business strategist. And he was telling me, he's like, Kevin, he's like, you should really consider hosting a podcast. And I'm like, why do you say that? He's like, well, Kev, he's like, you would do it just because you love talking with entrepreneurs. And he's like, that's just who you are. You love talking with entrepreneurs. And he's like, and you wouldn't mess it all up trying to figure out how to monetize it, but yet you totally will, and it'll just happen completely organic, just like it has for me. And I'm like, wow. I'm not okay. I was like, I hear you. I'm like, but Brad, I know, the last thing the business world needs is another Me Too podcast. How do we separate this thing apart if I was to do it? And he's like, Kev, he's like, you are going to talk with entrepreneurs about their most valuable relationships. And I was like, wow. I'm like, yeah, Brad, you're right. I would totally love doing that. And he's like, right? He's like, you would, wouldn't you? And so I was like, okay. I said, I'm going to go home and I'm going to reach out to some friends, some of my entrepreneur friends. And so I did. I reached out to a few entrepreneur friends and I said, hey, I'm thinking about hosting this podcast about business relationships. And would you be open to hopping on Zoom with me and just like, let's just have a conversation so I can kind of start experiencing it and giving you the experience. And so they were totally down with it. So we did. And it only took like 4 or 5 conversations. And Ross, I was totally hooked. I was loving it. They were loving it. It was just such an amazing experience. And a lot of these entrepreneurs, they're like, man, Kev, I have never talked about this before because nobody's ever asked me a question like this about my most valuable relationships. And so here we are now. 2.5 years into hosting this podcast. I think we just released our 252nd interview. This has been hands down the most rewarding and impactful thing that I have done in my 28 years as an entrepreneur. And it continues to just put me in contact with entrepreneurs and with founders and who are just doing such amazing things and making such massive impacts in this world. And I have no shortage of people who want to talk with me just because I host this podcast and stuff. And it's also become I mean, so much has come from it. I mean, one of the things that has come from it, my 54th interview was with a friend of mine, Roy Morjan. And Roy, I'd known him for a number of years. And when he gets on Zoom with me to do the interview, before we start recording, he's like, Kev, he's like, man, this is so amazing what you're doing. And what a perfect fit for you, man. And he's like, this must be such a valuable tool for doing what you do. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, my gosh. He's like, Kev, I listened to 3 of your interviews just to get a feel for what you were doing and stuff before I came on. And he's like, my gosh, for you, the guy who's the connector and the facilitator of relationships and the conduit of trust, what an amazing tool this is, because now when you're doing all these connections and facilitating these relationships, you get to share their podcast interviews with people. And I'm like, Roy, I'm not doing that at all. And I'm like, but you can dang sure bet I'm going to start doing that. And so now when I get to facilitate relationships, so many of them, I get to say, hey, you know what, Ross, I want to connect you with so-and-so. And here's why. And also, here's the interview that I did with them for the podcast, for the $1 Million Relationships podcast. Go check that out, because it's going to really give you a good idea of what they're all about and why I feel so strongly about connecting you guys. And I'll tell you what, Ross, you talk about putting some serious horsepower behind facilitating relationships and being a conduit of trust for the people that I serve. I mean, and there's nobody. I mean, that alone, it put us into a class of one, because there's nobody else doing that. And so now, whenever I do a podcast interview, I am like so intentional about the structure of that, because we're not just doing an interview. We are simultaneously creating a tool that's going to be used over and over again from that point forward to just really help me in just doing what I do and making the impact that I get to make, you know. And that's just one thing that's really come from this. But yeah, the podcast, man, it has been huge. And through that, I get to really just kind of, through finding out, just doing interviews with people and finding out who they are and what inspires them and all that. You know, for those that it makes sense, I do these virtual roundtables, and I just host them on Zoom. It's a small group event, 3-4 entrepreneurs, and I host like 2 or 3 of them a month, and I invite 3 or 4 entrepreneurs, never more than 4, and the whole purpose is to facilitate real, meaningful relationships for those entrepreneurs that will help each of them grow and expand their business and make a bigger impact in the world. And so I'm really intentional about who I invite. I never let any of them know who else is going to be joining them, because I don't want none of them Googling and researching each other in advance. I just want them to show up. Just be themselves, not coming with any preconceived ideas about who else they'll be meeting. They just kind of rely on me that, like, okay, you know, Kevin's going to invite the right people, and I trust Kevin, you know. And so when they get there, you know, they just come, and this is another big piece of it too. Everybody that I invite, they just come ready to help, to serve, to contribute, to pour into the other people, and in fact, that's who they are as a person. They couldn't show up any other way. That's just hardwired into their DNA. That's who they are. And I'll tell you, when you get a group of entrepreneurs like that who are already doing such big things, who they just show up that way, and every one of them shows up that way, it creates a very unique experience that few people have ever had, because it's everybody's like trying to outgive and out help each other, and it's pretty cool for me, a guy like me, to just watch that unfold each time I host one of these roundtables. And so, doing the roundtables, doing the podcast, it just I just invite people if it makes sense. And if we're, after having the conversation with them and doing the interview for the podcast, and if it feels in alignment, I'll tell them about the roundtable and invite them. And so and that's hosting the roundtable is just such a cool way for me to show up and just give and just be of service to other people. And then through that experience, the right people from there are like, you know what, Kev, man, that was pretty phenomenal. And I'd like to talk with you more. I'd like to maybe having somebody like you come alongside and kind of being my wingman, if you will, and just kind of really, just because here's the other thing that I found, Ross, is that these entrepreneurs at this level, they're like world class at doing what they do. They are world class experts. They've been doing what they do for years. They have this track record of getting results for their clients, all of that kind of stuff. But yet, they are some of the most humble people you would ever meet. And they're kind of timid when it comes to talking about themselves. And yet, for me, so I'll give you an example. I got one of my clients that I serve. He and his team, they run Facebook ads, they run Google ads, they run a lot of different ads. They have scaled one of their clients profitably to 1.5 million per month in ad spend. Well, I'll tell you, I don't know too many agencies that have done that. And he is like hesitant to talk about that, because he's like, Kevin, it sounds like I'm bragging, and and what we do is so much more than about that, I mean, that's part of it, but man, and I'm like, you know what, Alex, I'll tell people about you. and really what I end up doing is I get to kind of be his wingman and talk about him in a far, far more powerful way than he would ever talk about himself. And when I talk about him, if I'm talking with somebody that they think he might be able to help, they're damn near begging me for an introduction to him. And so I like being that guy who gets to talk about my clients and my partners far more powerfully than they would ever talk about themselves and stuff,
Brilliant. Yeah. I can hear the passion in your voice and the authenticity as well. I'm looking forward to my invitation, which is of course is in a couple of weeks. So I am looking forward to that even more now. And I know you've got another meeting coming up shortly. So thank you so much for today. Really enjoyed it. Is the podcast the best place where people can connect with you?
Yeah, check it out on you can find it on Apple, what have you. $1 Million Relationships is the name of the podcast and stuff. And if you are an entrepreneur who's doing stuff and making a big impact in the world already, and you place a high value on relationships, I would absolutely love to get to know you better and talk about the possibility of interviewing you for the podcast and stuff. And you can find me on Facebook, Kevin the Connector on Facebook. Just you don't have to send me a friend request. Just hit me a message and say, hey, Kevin, I'd love to talk with you about possibly doing an interview for the podcast. And I'd be absolutely honored to have that conversation.
Brilliant. Kevin, what a wonderful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Shall let you carry on with your day, and I'll speak to you, I'm sure, very soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks so much, Ross. It was an honor.